They tell him to stand up. Hit him in the body, he says. Hit him.
Oh, see, that's
Hello, everyone, and welcome to MMA Start to Finish. I'm Julian, and this is Matt.
Howdy.
Now, you may be asking yourself if this is the first time you've stumbled upon this channel. What is MMA Start to Finish? Well, we are a podcast that goes back and watches every WEC, Pride, and UFC and Strikeforce event, and we're going to do an episode on every single one. This podcast is a lot better if you sign up for Fight Pass and watch the events first. So today, we have the pleasure, or I guess afterward we would learn the displeasure, of watching the second ever Pride event.
3 hours.
Yeah, it was over 3 hours. The runtime on Fight Pass, which is edited, might I add, was 191 minutes.
It's too long.
We'll get into it.
In natural Japanese fashion, we had a lot of explosions. We didn't see the dragons yet. We saw the dragons later on.
They saved the
though.
dragons later for
Yeah.
suspense.
Explosive start, and then they got right into the fights.
First fight of the evening would feature Royler Gracie taking on Yuhi Sano. Gracie was giving up 52 pounds in this fight, but it did not seem like made that much of a difference,
No.
shockingly. So this fight was somewhat of a thematic sequel to the main event of Pride 1, where we had Rickson Gracie taking on Nobuhiko Takada. Both these guys are from the same camps. Royler is from, obviously, the Gracie family, son of Helio, and Sano trained out of the same gym as Takada and as Sakuraba. Now, this was a 33-minute long fight. The majority of the first half of this fight included basically no strikes. There was some little bit of taps here and there in the guard position, but the majority of the first half of this fight just consisted of Royler in mount thinking about what he was going to do next, or in the guard.
And when we say taps, we mean they are debatably taps.
Yeah.
They're barely even strikes. They're basically just like putting your hand aggressively on the other person.
Yeah, there's no... What I had in my notes was no significant strikes, and I think that's pretty safe to say.
Yeah. It got to the point where even our commentary was getting fairly aggravated.
Which they would do quite a bit throughout the evening. I will add, justifiably so, in many cases. This fight seemed a little slow, honestly, but with the context of what would come later in the night, now in retrospect, really doesn't seem that bad.
But Sano was just... He was playing defense just about the entire time.
Exclusively.
Yeah.
I couldn't name one aggressive action he took during the fight.
The only time he got aggressive was these like little split moments where he got kind of explosive, but then he'd go straight back into trying to get to Gracie's guard.
Yeah, he would explode into Royler's guard and then just chill there.
Yeah.
Eventually, Royler got tired of just fishing for arm bars and whatnot, so he decided, I'm going to start striking now, and from his back, beat the shit out of Sano. He butchered him.
There was a point where Royler was on his ass with like feet up and arms ready, chasing Yuhi around the ring.
He was the dominant fighter from his ass.
Yeah, it was crazy to see it. But
And with basically no head movement by Sano, he absorbed probably upwards of like 6 up kicks to the mouth.
oh yeah, his face was pretty messed up by the end of this. Boss Rutan was getting pretty upset with the fighters to the point where he started insulting them.
He got a little frustrated, especially with Sano.
He compared the fight to jazz music at a metal concert, and even called one of them just a punching bag.
Yeah, I think it was actually Steven Quadros who at the end of the fight, or toward the end of the fight, said Sano was auditioning for a job as a punching bag for Everlast.
Yeah, it was real rude.
Which is pretty harsh, dude. It's the first fight. After Royler butchered Sano, he eventually did get one of those submissions to go his way, sinking in an armbar and mercifully ending this over half-hour-long affair.
But not without Boss Rutan making one more quip, saying, was he tapping or was he hitting?
There wasn't much of a difference.
Yeah.
So Sano not exactly doing his pro wrestling brethren proud. Our next fight of the evening would feature the return of Akira Shoji to take on Juan Mat. So if we're comparing this fight to our last fight, this fight was actually, now that I'm looking at it, an 11th of the time. Took an 11th of how long the first fight took. A lot of variety in the length of combat here in Pride. So the fight started off with both guys exchanging leg kicks. Eventually, Shoji would get in there with a pretty good jab, which he would use to clinch and wind up taking Juan down.
Shoji advanced to mount and then eventually got a full mount with his legs getting in the grapevines.
Yeah.
There was a scramble, and Akira took his back and sunk in, choke on his neck, on Juan's neck, and then he tapped.
So after a strong showing at Pride 1, getting a 10-minute draw against one of the Gracies, Akira Shoji improved upon that performance, scoring a submission victory here in under 4 minutes. One of the shorter fights we would bear witness to tonight.
Yeah.
Considerably so. Now here we would see our first of 2 kickboxing matches we have this evening. Now Pride is weird, especially early Pride. It is not strictly an MMA promotion, and we would have these kickboxing. They said kickboxing, but it was Muay Thai rules fights mixed throughout. How do you feel about it? Do you like having these kickboxing fights to mix things up, or do you think it's just distracting?
I think it's a little distracting, but they've already got the boxing ring, so might as well use it.
It seems like a better stage for that than, say, if they tried to have kickboxing fights in the octagon.
I think it would flow better if they didn't mix them into these MMA fights.
If they just had, like, separate events that were kickboxing events under the same name.
Or even just led with the kickboxing.
Just to, like, as an appetizer, in a amuse-bouche, if you will.
These are the prelims and then the main card kind of thing.
Maybe they should hire you.
Maybe. I say as, like, I'm an expert in this.
We would see the return of Ralph White from his cartoonish injury against Bronco Sikatic at Pride 1, returning with no lump on his head to take on William Roosmalen, the kickboxer from the Netherlands, who Bas Rutten had said that he actually met him. I don't know if he said he met him, but they bounced clubs together in the Netherlands. For the first round of this fight, Ralph White actually looked pretty good. He looked like he was first to a lot of the exchanges. But as the rounds wore on, I don't know if it was an endurance thing or not understanding how to defend against leg kicks thing, but as the fight progressed, some of his holes would start to show themselves.
Yeah, White was definitely leading. He started off with some good leg kicks and just overall being a dominant person in this fight.
I think where things really started to change, especially in the second and third round, was when they got into the clinch. Especially with a lot of the knees Roosmalen was landing to the legs of Ralph. Felt like it immobilized him a little bit. In between rounds 2 and 3, as he was walking to the corner, commentary made note of his limp in perhaps the least politically correct way I could imagine. Stephen Quadros saying, I don't think that's a ghetto strut.
Yeah.
So, it's the 90s, bro. Say whatever the fuck you want.
So Roosmalen's knees would actually be his finishing move. One of those knees landed right in White's liver.
Those knees from the clinch would be the downfall of Ralph. He would crumple to the ground after a follow-up knee and not answer the 10 count successfully.
Yeah, he was getting there.
He was making his way back up to the feet, but the 10 count does not go by, are you starting to regain form? You have to answer the ref's commands at the 10 count. I don't know how much we'd see this in Japan, but like in boxing, not only do you have to answer the 10 count, but you have to like listen to the directions and instructions of the ref. He'll be like, look at my finger this way, look at my finger this way, step that way. I don't think they're taking quite those safety precautions in Pride in 1998,
no.
But regardless, Ralph could not answer the bell and would lose this first kickboxing fight. After his success at the Ultimate Japan in the UFC, Sakuraba has decided to take his talents to his home promotion here in Pride taking on Vernon Tiger White, who did some training at the Lion's Den. Now, we learned early in this fight that this was Sakuraba's third mixed martial arts fight, which means if you do the math and go back to the end of 1997, both fight 1 and 2 against Conan Silveira were his first and second fights respectively, which is kind of insane. In your first 2 fights, you won a medal.
And I'm still upset that he won because, like...
Shenanigans.
That second fight wasn't... It shouldn't have been a thing, you know?
Yeah, they're not going to try and repeat that setting, for sure.
Yeah.
This was a very frustrating fight. Now, it wasn't frustrating the same way that Chemo and Dan from Pride 1 was frustrating, where both guys kind of just stood there, tepidly, not doing anything. Both these guys were really trying to go for some submission attempts. A lot of arm bars attempted by Sakuraba, and a couple chokes attempted by Ralph. Unfortunately, both of them are not as polished as perhaps they could be, and lost a lot of submission attempts that in most other fights I feel like would have led to the end.
Yeah. Sakuraba just seemed hyper-focused on getting an armbar.
Yeah, and he attempted it so many times that eventually it was telegraphed. Anytime he reached to grab at the hands, you were like, oh, another armbar attempt.
He even had moments where he could have gotten a triangle choke and opted instead for the armbar.
He did eventually transition into, I couldn't remember or see if it was a key lock or a Kimura, but a different arm lock, but eventually decided, fuck all that noise, I'm going back to Old Faithful, and would proceed to attempt 3 or 4 more straight arm bars.
Yeah. And Mr. White, he just didn't really seem to know how to take advantage of his positions.
I'll just say it. He didn't know what the fuck he was doing in a very specific setting, because he had Sakuraba's back maybe 2 to 4 times, and the first and second time he attempted a choke, a rear naked choke, but didn't sink the hooks in, so he had no control over the body and just sort of fell off to the side. And at another time when he had Sakuraba's back,
he literally just gave up. He threw one punch in from the side to Sakuraba's face and then got up.
He literally just sat on his back and back mount, looked at him like, what do I do?
What do I do
Did
here?
this little tippy tap on his back a couple times, and then just stood up and got off of him.
Yeah.
It felt like he didn't know he was allowed to punch him in the face from there.
Yeah.
It really felt like that.
Or maybe he thought, like, punches from behind were illegal?
You weren't allowed to punch the back of the head.
Yeah.
But from back mount, you see it all the time. You just loop punches around the side and get the ear and the side of the face. And some borderline spots. But, no, he was just content with going back to the feet, where things only lasted for so long.
Yeah. We just kept switching around between positions, who had top, who had bottom.
Eventually, on the 12th or 85th attempt, Sakuraba would be successful with one of these arm bars.
Finally.
It ends.
You think that trying an arm bar so many times, you think White would just know what was coming?
I guess, law of large numbers, brother. Just keep trying. Give yourself as many opportunities as you can. Get shots on net and all that,
Yeah.
But perhaps some more variety in Sakuraba's submission arsenal would do him well. With all that said, like I mentioned before, this is his 3rd fight, and he's a pro wrestler.
Yeah.
And we've seen quite a few pro wrestlers in Pride at this point. He's easily done the best out of any of the Japanese pro wrestlers we've seen by far. This fight was bullshit. If I can put it in so many words. I'm mad. Had we not fast-forwarded through a giant portion of this fight,
we would still be watching.
We'd still be watching the event right now. We wouldn't be recording. For those of you who are unaware of what we're talking about, good. Thank God. I said to Matt during the fight that they show footage of this to the prisoners at Guantanamo to extract information.
We're talking about the Henzo Gracie versus Sanai Kakuta fight.
It went... Now, we should mention that last fight between Sakuraba and White went into the 3rd round.
Yeah.
Now, how long are these rounds? Your guess is as good as ours.
Yeah. We thought they might have been 10-minute rounds, Wikipedia says 15.
Now, Wikipedia says 15-minute rounds for this fight. However, with how flagrantly they are just changing the rules on the fly, it feels, I wouldn't be surprised to find out, oh, that was 15-minute rounds, but the fight before that, that was 10-minute rounds. It's so all over the place that it basically doesn't matter. So, at the long end, this fight was
Over 75 minutes.
over 75 fucking minutes in 6 rounds of nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. I mean, I can show you this still from the fight, and you will have watched basically as much of this fight as we did.
Yeah.
Now, who was in whose guard may have changed a couple times during the fight, but did anybody do anything for over the length of some films? No. No, they didn't.
This is about the same runtime as the Simpsons movie.
I'll just give you how my notes progressed as the rounds ended. Round 1 ends. All right. Round 2 ends. This fight sucks. You can see I'm losing my patience a little bit. Round 3 ends. Fuck this.
Also, by the time we've gotten to the end of round 2, that's a half hour.
Yeah. So these aren't 5-minute rounds where I'm getting a little cheesed. I'm wading through basically what would be the modern equivalent of full fights to get more and more angry, okay?
Yeah.
Now, we get to the 4th round. Round 4 ends. Please kill me. Round 5 ends. Commentary says, what's the point?
Yep.
I don't know who was more mad during this fight, me or commentary, because we were both fairly cheesed, to put it kindly.
I think commentary had to tone it back, even
Yeah.
though they're going off the rails a
They're
little
going
bit.
pretty hard,
But they're stuck there and they have to watch it.
and they couldn't just hit the advanced 10-second button 85 times. They actually had to witness this in its entirety.
Yeah. Eventually, I just resorted to making puns, like Kakuta asking the Yakuza in a very roundabout way if he can be a guard, because he loves the guard. And Kakuta used to be an adventurer, but settled down in Yokohama to become a guard, because he loves the guard.
I actually just don't understand. So that's not true. I understand the strategy of Henzo coming into this fight. The Gracies have said in the past that they don't want time limits. They think time limits are unrealistic, and it puts them at a disadvantage. That's the main reason we saw Hoist apart from the UFC when they started to introduce real time limits. So they're a big fan of the long con, and that's kind of what they set up for. But Kakuta, what are you doing? What is your game plan? I don't understand. And again, this is another fight where the striking was very limited, to put it nicely.
Oh, yeah.
Almost no strikes of any meaning were exchanged
It
by
wasn't,
either man.
it wasn't until the 4th round where we saw any strikes of any real significance. And by that point, we're an hour in.
Now, also, we're just in purgatory this entire time because there's no clear end to this. We don't know how long the rounds are. We don't know how many rounds there are. And after every round, we're like, you gonna keep going? Are we done? Are we gonna be released from this hell? No! The 6th round would begin, and we would moan in agony. Mercifully, that 6th round was the end of the fight.
Yeah. It ended pretty quick in that 6th round, actually.
Thank God.
Yeah. That was... Commentary felt the same way. They were saying, thank God it's over.
Henzo would eventually, and I stress every syllable in eventually, get a guillotine choke and head home.
Kakuta tapped, and 53 minutes in, we were done with this fight. No, not 53 minutes, 75 minutes. That was my note from when I thought this was a 10-minute round
Ordeal.
fight.
Yeah.
10-minute rounds. I was so wrong.
All I'll say is thank God for the modern round system. And for stand-ups, by the way. We should point out
Oh, yeah.
that a huge issue in this was not just the length of the fight, but the fact that I'm fairly certain that unless you're up against the ropes and they need to reposition you, at this point the Pride referees have no ability or jurisdiction to issue a stand-up.
Yeah. Though I will say, I think tonight only validated the Gracies.
I mean, I guess. I
'Cause-
mean, they won.
for the 3 fights that we saw, 2 of them with the Gracies, 1 without them, they all went the distance and they were finished.
The long con pays off.
But not for the consumer.
Not for the consumer.
Because,
at all.
Like, the Japanese didn't start booing at any of this.
Could you imagine?
They're a very polite crowd compared to the U.S.
Just as a sidebar tangent, can you imagine if this fight happened in, like, fucking Detroit? Or, like, Birmingham? They'd burn the venue down.
Yeah. Everyone would have wanted their money back.
Would have been declared a war zone.
Yeah. That thing in Brazil with the gun?
You ain't
that's
seen shit
nothing.
yet.
Yeah.
After the epic of Henzo and Kakuta, we would be treated to our second kickboxing/Muay Thai event of the night. This time showcasing George Randolph and Tassis Pedris is what they have here on the matchup card. But on Wikipedia, it says that he has changed his name to Tosca. And I think that was actually on his shorts, too, in the ring. Tosca.
Maybe he changed it, like, way earlier and they just kept going by his legal name.
Just going by what's on the document, bro.
Yeah.
Now, this fight could very easily have been billed as David versus Goliath. Pedros is no small man at 6'1", 214, but considering he's fighting someone who could have been an extra in the Game of Thrones at all 6'7", 287 of him, there was definitely a size differential in this fight.
Yeah. 70 pounds and 6 inches, if you don't want to do the math. It's a large man.
So for the early portion of this fight, I thought George looked really good. He was throwing with a lot of power. Not everything was landing that well, but he seemed to be the more aggressive fighter, and his shots seemed to be more impactful when they did land. However, it's kind of a similar story with the last kickboxing fight we saw, where Ralph showed power early, and we saw that begin to drain as the fight went on. George is a lot bigger. George is 6'7", so you can imagine that his energy is going to get sapped a lot faster than Ralph White.
I think George definitely had the first 2 rounds. They kind of blended together for us.
Yeah.
But he seemed to dominate most of the ring. But as soon as round 3 came around, he was telegraphing his movements way too easily and was just getting sloppy with his hits.
And I feel like a lot of the leg kicks he was eating were starting to add up. His mobility was altered. We couldn't really see leg kick damage the way we do now on a person's leg because George was wearing, not only was he wearing full karate pants, he was wearing his black belt.
Yeah.
Which I guess is fine.
Weird. I mean, it's not like they can tear it off of him. It's a kickboxing match, so. For as sloppy as George was getting, he did almost knock Tassis out of the ring, which he, like, balanced on the rope and then fell back into the square.
Now, if this was a modern event, I would really push Pride to be like, you guys gotta adopt a cage.
Yeah.
It does not seem like a ring is the most suitable venue for a mixed martial arts fight. But we have the benefit of hindsight here, and I do know Pride sticks with the ring. That's kind of their thing. So, more of this in our future. More of men tumbling out to the ground below.
If they did get a proper cage, would it be a square?
You'd have to ask the Yakuza. As we got into the last couple rounds of the fight, George would eat some big hooks and some knees in the clinch, and we would actually go to a decision. We weren't sure if we had judges because they never clarified that, and these other fights seemed like they went on ad infinitum. So we sort of half expected this to just go on until someone said no mas, but after the 5th round, we went to the scorecards, and Tassis Pedris was the victor.
Yep. They didn't say if it was unanimous or
A split decision.
just he won. Which is fair to say. Out of the 5 rounds, he seemed to get 3 of them.
We weren't really sure how they scored the fight. They didn't really give us any clarity on that. I wasn't sure if they did round-by-round scoring or if they judged the fight as a whole. Either way, however you want to judge it, to me it seemed like Pedris was the victor.
Yeah.
Now it's time for what Matt and I would be the most exciting event of the evening. 2 legends of the UFC that we hadn't seen in quite some time squaring off in Japan.
While we were watching this, we were actually talking about Marco Huas taking down Paul Varlins, and how it would be interesting to see Paul come back. We don't know for sure if he will, but it was interesting to see. And then, of course, we see Marco Huas come back right then and there versus Big Daddy Gary Goodridge. So,
Got a serious pop from us as we were watching.
Yeah! Both fighters came out with their staples, Gary with his jabs and Marco with his kicks. Gary didn't like those kicks. Marco didn't like those jabs. They eventually went to the ground, and Gary got side control. And Gary just kept busting Marco with that right hand of his.
Yeah, he delivered what was the most impactful ground and pound of the night. A couple times there was getting a little touch and go with, had that gone on for several more seconds, we might have seen the fight finish there. But Marco was able to recover and prevent himself from being finished on the ground. Yeah. And unfortunately, as we've seen as kind of a theme for Gary, he would start to run out of steam as the fight reached the 9th minute. And in that 9th minute, Marco would take advantage of his position on the bottom and grab a hold of one of Gary's legs.
And it was interesting to see that happen because Marco was on his back because Gary threw him onto the ground.
Yeah, he kind of just gave him a shoulder shove onto the floor. It wasn't a takedown.
Yeah, it was just him buffing out.
Yeah, brute force.
Yeah. And there's a little funny moment where Marco slapped Gary and Gary just gave him this look of, how dare you.
Busted him up pretty good. He's got a cut. But Marco is very much unbound. And there's that.
Perhaps that was to distract him to set up the leg lock.
Maybe.
Marco's playing mind games. Seeing the tap was a little hard just because of the camera angle we had. I think Gary tapped on the opposite side of what we could see because we kind of just saw the ref step in and Marco released the hold.
This is after the tap, because they were facing the other way originally, and then Gary gets back onto his back and the other arm, and the ref is almost split second, he's in there telling them to stop. And I think this is Marco getting onto his back to let go of his foot.
Yeah, he certainly wasn't cranking into that thing anymore. He was starting to release it. Being a nice man, not tearing Gary's ACL.
Yeah.
Now, I had thought that they easily could have headlined this card with Gary and Marco, but they elected to headline this card with the Smashing Machine Mark Kerr, who we are both fans of, taking on the comic book villain Branko Cikatic, who we last saw gravely wounding Ralph White in an illegal way during their kickboxing fight.
Leaving that cartoonish welt on his head. There's a 40-pound difference between the two in favor of Mark Kerr, but even though Mark Kerr is technically the taller one, Branko looked taller.
It might have been
just the angle?
Yeah.
I guess. Because Mark looked to be the smaller one, and part of that, it was due to Branko's, I guess, kickboxing shorts. They're, real big.
Yeah, that was the weird thing, because when they announced this fight, I was like, and this is an MMA fight?
Yeah.
Because we didn't see Branko in an MMA match before, or an MMA fight before. It really felt like that they were punishing Branko for what he did. They were like, oh, you want to strike on the ground? How about we put you in there with a man named the Smashing Machine?
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens.
Who's much larger than you.
And what happened? Chaos. Nonsense. Shenanigans. One of the only times in my 22 years on this planet that I've heard the Japanese audience angrily boo an event.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll just get into the shenanigans.
Yeah, might as well.
So the first issue in this fight was when Mark went in for a takedown. Branko, as he was prone to do, bent the rules a little bit. Decided to hook his arm to the rope, which you can't do. And then from that position, threw some rabbit punches at the back of Mark's head, even as the ref was kind of separating them. And the problem with that separation is you separate them and they're back standing, which just means that's just a benefit to Branko because he was doing that to prevent being taken down. And now you've rewarded him for cheating functionally. You heard Mark's corner pissed off saying, he had his legs. He had his legs.
Yeah. And Mark tried to hold the position, but quickly realized that if he held that position when they got reset, he was basically kneeling in front of Branko, just holding his legs, and that's a terrible position to be in.
It also seemed like there was not one, but several language barriers that had to be dealt with in this fight. Nobody could understand each other.
Yeah.
Mark's from America, Bronco's from Croatia, the referees are Japanese. No one can really communicate anything other than nonverbal things to anybody.
And it seemed like the refs didn't tell Bronco not to hold the rope, but they were explaining to Mark Kerr that was why they were separated, that Bronco was holding the rope.
And I don't think they deducted a point, because they didn't work like that. But they did issue what seemed like a verbal warning via the announcer to Bronco, which he didn't even really acknowledge, if I'm being honest, which, how could he? It was in Japanese. He didn't speak Japanese. The only way we knew it was a warning was because Boss Rutan told us.
So after the fight was reset, they were back on their feet. They get back into a clinch with Mark pushing Bronco into the fence, or the ropes, I guess. And Bronco immediately hooks onto the ropes, 2 of them, and the refs are immediately on them saying, "Stop, stop." Bronco responds by elbowing Mark in his spine and his neck, which you're not allowed to do, in the back of the head.
And Mark Kerr had enough of that shit. Even as several refs entered the ring to try and separate the fighters, Mark was throwing punches at Bronco. Basically, like, at this point, Mark Kerr's a nice, soft-spoken man.
Yeah.
But at this point was like, hey, kind of fuck you. You're kind of an asshole. And then, in a bit of karmic justice, as they separated, I believe commentary said, Mark threw a kick to the downed Bronco.
Yeah.
Which kind of sucks to suck, gotta say.
Mark threw that kick in. We could barely see it, though. Bronco had kind of tumbled through the ropes, not onto the ground, but onto the mat, the canvas. And he was stuck there. The refs kept both fighters apart for a while. Right here you can see Mark trying to get more hits in on Bronco. But at that point, the refs just stopped the fight entirely.
And here's a little treat for you. If you've gotten this deep into the podcast and somehow you haven't watched Pride 2, we're just going to show you the disaster that ensued.
Everything is at stake. And I think, see, he's elbowing to the back of the head. That's not legal. That is not legal. And so Kerr is really getting rough. Uh-oh, he gets angry. Kerr got angry too because there was a flagrant rule. There was a flagrant rule.
Mark Kerr would win via disqualification and thus would end what so far I would describe as the biggest dumpster fire of an event we have covered on this show.
It only could have been worse if it was tournament style and they didn't have a champion.
Honestly, really the only silver linings on this card were some of the submission finishes, which were interesting, not including some of their contexts, and the fight between Gary and Marco. Those were fun. Those were nice. Outside of that, if that was cherry and apple pie, the rest of this card was Civil War era hardtack, and you were just consuming that to survive. Not exactly a treat.
Yeah. Mark would apologize to the Japanese audience through a translation, and they would applaud him. Bronco would then get on the mic and be immediately booed by everyone in the stadium.
I should also point out, Bronco was the one disqualified, did not really apologize when he spoke to the crowd.
No, he basically said he wanted a rematch.
He wanted a rematch.
Yeah.
And if I was Mark Kerr, I'd kind of go tell him to kick rocks.
Yeah.
Up next on MMA Start to Finish, we're keeping things in Japan for Pride 3. Until then, if you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit the like button. It helps out a great deal. And leave a comment telling us what you thought about this tire fire of an event.
Your love is appreciated, and it helps us get through these long,
trying
arduous
times.
fights. Yeah, these trials and tribulations.
So until then, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you later.
Bye, we love you.